In A4.7, they want us to talk. Whoa! They want us to talk about how the process of learning can improve an organism or an animal, or well, animals are organisms, but their chance of survival. And we're going to look at four different types of behaviors that are some are more closely linked to learned, and some are more closely like on the innate side. And as I'm going through these, I want you to think in your mind, is that something that an organism is born with and it's in their genetic code? Or is it learned some way through experiences? So the first one I don't have on here, that's super convenient. It's called habituation. So habituation just means that after being exposed over and over to the same stimulus, eventually the response changes. Usually we're talking about how the response disappears. So I think like a classic one here would be pigeons. Like I'm sure before pigeons decided to move into urban areas and surrounded by people, they were quite afraid of them. But then after being surrounded by them so many times, they've learned that, oh, you know what, this human isn't going to do anything to me, so I don't need to fly away, or I don't need to be so alert. I think we see this with lots of animals that over time they realize that the situation may not be as dangerous as it seems, and they act differently. So that would be habituation. The second one is called imprinting. Imprinting happens usually very young in an animal's life. The classic one is this behavior of ducks and geese that when the baby ducks are born, they just follow mom around and they just do whatever she does. And that's super advantageous to your survival because you're less likely to be eaten by whatever likes to eat small ducks or geese if you're near your mother, because your mother can look out for you. So that's definitely a great way to avoid predation. The last two that we're going to look at are two different types of conditioning. So the first one is called classical conditioning. And classical conditioning is a situation where an animal actually responds to a stimulus, but never really was connected to that stimulus. It's almost like the two responses are disconnected. And I think the famous one is the Pavlov's dog, right? So Pavlov's dog, I'm not sure if you know the story, but every time the dog would eat, it would salivate. And he would see food and the dog would salivate. And then they did this thing where they rang a bell while they were giving food to the dog. So now the dog was associating the bell and the food and would salivate when he heard the bell and the food. And then they removed the food and just rang the bell. And when they did that, the dog still salivated. So the bell is unrelated to food, but the response to the stimulus was still the same. So that would be an example of classical conditioning. Operant conditioning is behaviors that are learned based on rewards and based on punishments. And just doing this over and over and over again, you get the behavior that you desire. And I think we can all relate operant conditioning to when we're trying to train our dogs, right? Maybe not to go to the bathroom in the house or not to jump on people or whatever other. That would be like negative reinforcement, but maybe positive reinforcement with your dogs also, like when they do something good and you give them a treat. So these are all different ways that help animals survive better.